If the Bible's got you tied in knots, if you're burdened with religious thoughts, come grab a drink and join the choir. It's Heretic Happy Hour.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the Heretic Happy Hour podcast. We are so excited to talk to you guys today. But before we get into our special edition podcast, let's introduce ourselves all around. I'm Keith Giles, and I'm joined by my good friends and fellow Quoir authors, Jamal and Matt. Say hi, guys.
I'm Jamal Javanji. I'm the author of the book Free to Love, published by Quoir, and it's such an honor to be back on the Heretic Happy Hour. Really enjoyed listening to as a listener, I've actually went back and listened to the last few, and it's been, man, I just laugh that you guys are funny.
And thanks. I'm Matthew Distefano, author of the book From the Blood of Abel, also on Quoir Publishing. And I'm stoked to be here and stoked to talk about this topic that we have coming up for you guys, which, like Keith mentioned, it's going to be a special edition podcast because it's not going to be what was on our regularly scheduled program. It's going to be, and of course, we only make it 3 episodes into this thing with me on it. We're going to talk about, in a roundabout way, we're going to talk about cussing and the offense it might cause and all that good stuff. But before we do that, we have our 4th heretic of the week, which
it's
Keith.
The Heretic of the Week.
I forgot about that thing. Keith's going to introduce our heretic of the week, and Keith, tell him who it is.
Yeah, so our heretic of the week is a guy named John Bunyan, and you may not know him by name, but most likely if you've been a Christian for any length of time, or you've made a visit to the local Christian bookstore, you've seen a book called Pilgrim's Progress, and it's a very famous work of Christian fiction. It's a very allegorical, it's meant to be a story that illustrates the journey, the life, the spiritual life and journey and maturity of a Christian, and he's tempted and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but the guy who wrote it, John Bunyan, he's our heretic of the week, and I find it very fascinating because this is several years ago. I was doing some research and I came across this idea that John Bunyan was considered a heretic, and so here's what happened. In 1658, John Bunyan was arrested and indicted for preaching the gospel without a license. Yes, he was preaching the gospel without a license, and he kept on preaching in spite of the fact that he was convicted and arrested, and he managed to avoid being arrested until 1660 when he was put in prison. So but essentially what happened was he was put in jail for preaching the gospel. He refused to stop, and he even told them when he was in jail, he said, "If you release me today, I will preach tomorrow." Like he was in complete defiance of this law that said that you couldn't preach the gospel. So the background of it is basically that under Charles II, there was this law, and that John Bunyan was unlicensed as a preacher of the gospel, as England kind of turned to Anglicanism. And so as a result, unlicensed non-Anglican houses of worship were closed and all citizens were required to attend an Anglican church. So under this rule, it became illegal for Christians in England to do anything, outside of the Anglican circle. So because John Bunyan no longer had freedom to preach that he had enjoyed under the Puritan system, and because he refused to stop preaching the gospel, he got arrested November 12, 1660, for preaching the gospel, by the way, in a private home. He wasn't on the street. He wasn't like on a street corner. He wasn't disturbing the peace or anything, but he was breaking the law. And so originally he was confined for 3 months, but because he said, you can let me go and I'm not going to, I'm going to keep on preaching the gospel, his confinement, which was supposed to last 3 months, ended up lasting 12 years. And it was during those 12 years, under those 12 years, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress. So there you go. If he hadn't defied the order and stayed in jail for 12 years, we wouldn't have had the book, Pilgrim's Progress. There you go. John Bunyan, Heretic of the Week.
Well, I don't know if, I don't want to derail us or anything, but I don't know if we mentioned this, and I just want to get this in there because we never remember to mention that we actually have a heretic hotline. Have we talked about this on the podcast before?
Oh, what now? What?
Oh, no, I'm glad you interrupted me to tell them that. Finally.
Well, guys, I want you to know that we have to mention the Heretic Hotline, because if we don't mention the Heretic Hotline, people cannot call in or leave us texts or anything like that. And luckily, I don't even know how. I think just the providential nature of the way the universe works, that somehow people already have heard about the Heretic Hotline, which is a blessing. And I think that we have received actual voicemails on the Heretic Hotline already. We've received quite a few, and some that are actually pertinent for this very episode that we're doing today.
Hey, I was listening to your first episode, and I had a question that popped into my head. Is if heresies in the eye of the beholder, is orthodoxy in the eye of the beholder as well, or is that something completely different? And are you guys planning on covering orthodoxy in the upcoming episodes? Thanks.
Oh, I think we are now. Yeah. Yes, we will. Sometime in the future, we will put together an episode that will cover that topic.
Yeah, let's just add this to the list right here.
Great question, by the way. I think it's a really good question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Do we have another one?
Hi, this is your cousin Vinny. How you doing? I, too, used to be a heretic. That's why I listen to the Heretic Happy Hour. You guys might be able to repent yourselves. Anyhow, I love the show, and I don't think you're keeping up with all the swears, okay? And I want to know how much money per swear is going in, because I'm going to keep track. You guys are going to pay up. You're going to go to hell with that language. But anyhow, loving the show, especially the last one. But love you guys. Be well. Oh, yeah, by the way, the good news keeps on getting mo better and mo better. Keep it up. Bye.
Oh, there we are. I think I also have heard a couple things slip through, but not me.
Yep.
But not me. We always get me.
No, we get you.
We got one more.
One more.
Hi, Keith, Matt, and Jamal. This is Clay from South Carolina. Can we agree on what a swear word is? Because Keith said dick the other day, and he didn't get charged. And so sometimes I hear swear words and nobody gets charged. So I wanted to define what a swear word is and come to an agreement. I love the podcast, love you guys, and hope to meet you one day. Have a great one.
All right, so yeah. Like we said, some have slipped through, but no, I think.
And I love. Well, first of all, is this Clay, right? Clay, thank you for your message. First of all, I love your voice, Clay. I mean, I don't know. It sounds like you've done some broadcasting, work, but I love that you called out Keith on saying the word dick because it was just funny.
Is that a cuss word?
You know what?
Is that a cuss word?
When I listened to the episode back again, I caught that myself, and I even got away with a couple. I just love it that Matt gets away with nothing.
Yeah,
he
you
just
did.
Gets away with nothing
because we're expecting him to. See, no one expects us. So.
Yeah, I don't get away with anything, but it hasn't been so bad early on. I think our numbers are only at people want to keep track. I think the first question was how much are we giving per cuss word. And I don't know if we actually figured that out, but I'm thinking what my idea was is that we were gonna donate to a nonprofit, a charity, and that people hopefully could match it like it's a cuss-a-thon. So I think you do like 10 or 25 cents a cuss, and then people can match that and donate to a charity of their choice or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate that I'm the charity. I really appreciate that.
Oh, right, yeah. It goes to the charity of Jamal's royalties.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we can have people on the Facebook group, give us some. Maybe we'll have like a survey or a poll. People can vote.
That's a good idea.
It is. Hey, can I ask a question?
Of course.
I'd like to ask a question.
Hey, but before you do that, real quick, can I say we didn't give out the hotline? We didn't actually give them the hotline number.
Again.
This is why no one calls the hotline. We don't tell them what the number is.
I got it. It's
real quick.
Go for it.
Well, I got it right here. All right, it's 2403 heresy. So that's 240-343-7379. Call it, use it, text us, leave a message, and we will use it if it's cool.
Yeah, it's got to be cool.
The next podcast. Got to be funny, cool, interesting.
Okay, well, here's my question. And again, this is I think this is the pertinent question. This is like a very important question for the Christian world right now, in light of everything. This is a question I want to ask. Like, what is a cuss word? Like, what is it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think most of the times what the current culture sort of quote unquote collectively agrees is offensive, maybe. I mean the
well, for example, we know. Well, I was going to say, like, we ourselves have agreed, at least amongst ourselves, because otherwise, how do we know when to ring the bell and drop some money into the cup, right? I mean, if we'd have to agree on what it is, otherwise we'd be confused about when a cuss word was said.
I think it was just up to our dictator who rings it up when he wants.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Yeah, he just does it.
Oh, look, see right there. Come on now.
Yeah, there you go. For no reason.
No, so I
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. How do we agree on what a cuss word is? Do we have an answer to that?
Well, I mean, I think culture has sort of given us, right? I mean, like, movies and television, right? Like, there's a list of things you can't say on television. Like George Carlin, the comedian, did this whole great routine on that, right? Here are the words you can't say on television or the radio, right? So the FCC has made rules, and although those have changed over time, right? There was a time where you couldn't say hell,
right,
or ass, or whatever. Now you can say that all day, and no one cares. But anyway, so it's sort of a moving target. But there was sort of like a, like movie ratings and TV ratings. This is rated, PG-13 for language, and typically there's this kind of list of words that can't be said because they're offensive. But I mean, I've not done any research on who made that list and how did that list get started and who decides what's on and what's off. I don't know. It seems like it's just sort of a cultural thing.
I think anything really is kind of like that in culture, that whatever the collective culture decides, it's like a collective consciousness decides about really anything. And morals are that way too. Things that are considered moral today would be, very much immoral 50 years ago, that kind of thing. So it's not like something that's definitive. I mean, my second language is French. I'm obviously not fluent. I'm learning, but one of the things I've done, and I hear people swear in French when I was in Europe, and then I sometimes will repeat those words, and they have no effect on me. It literally has no effect, even though I know cognitively what it means. It doesn't feel like a swear word to me. But then, like, some of the reaction of my friends around me, they'll laugh or whatever, and obviously it has a connotation with them. So I do think it comes back down to whatever the collective society says is a swear word, but is it in itself substantively bad? I think that's the question,
Well, is it offensive? Yes, that's one question. The other one is it, in other words, something can be offensive but not really be bad. Mm-hmm. It's just people are offended, I mean, and like your point about language is a good point. Like, if you're British and someone says bloody, well, that doesn't bother anybody in America. We can say bloody all day long, but in England, that's a big deal.
And this is something to think about too. Like, what, when people talk about, hey, you can say those words, but really, what does it profit you to say those words in a conversation? Like, is it profitable? I think some of the pushback that we've heard on the podcast, because obviously this podcast, the Heretic Happy Hour, is like, if you look on iTunes, it's labeled explicit, and folks who listen to that, some of the pushback that we've got has been, hey, do you guys really need to use that language? Is it really profitable? Are you really advancing the seriousness of some of the topics that you're talking about using this kind of language? And that's a question I think is maybe something that we could talk about.
That's a good question, but sometimes there are even better questions. Maybe like if you say, if what is it profitable? Well, to answer that, maybe it shows vulnerability, it shows realness, it shows, and it brings people into the conversation who might not otherwise be in the conversation, because sometimes I think we get so maybe whitewashed, and it's like we have these Christian cuss words that are just different cuss words, so we replace them, and that just turns off people who have been in there, and the nuns and the duns, those type of folks who have walked away from the church or who would never go to the church. I think you don't, and that's not to say you just start saying fuck and shit and all these things as a way to draw people in on, but it's just, I think, showing a realness that when you aren't shying away from maybe raw feelings or raw emotions, that you can be vulnerable and you can not tiptoe around. So careful to use the wrong language that it shows your realness that people, at least in my experience, I mean, I'm sure I've turned off some people with my language, but I've also had people thank me for being real and vulnerable and consider faith again where they might not have considered faith. And is that due to my cussing specifically? Maybe not, but it points towards a more of someone like myself who I try to be vulnerable and real with people and not try to be fake.
Well, Matt, I'll say this about you specifically because I've had a number of conversations just in people I know personally, I have personal relationships with, that they somehow got connected to you online through, we have mutual friends. So they were like, oh, I heard, because, I've interviewed you on my personal podcast before and people have heard of you. So they befriended you. And I've had conversations with people and they'll say, that Matt guy, dude, I've never they're like, he's a Christian. Like this guy really seems to really have a beautiful heart for God and really loves to have these really in-depth conversations. And then he'll drop like an F-bomb online. And they were like, people that I know that are like, they have told me, they were like, that's real. Like, that's like real life. And they really appreciate it. I've actually not personally met anybody that was offended by that. But there is that, to your point, it just brings a reality to your, like, it's not like you're stuck in some lofty office somewhere, pontificating about these theological ideas, but are so far removed from culture or just how people communicate in everyday life. It's cool to see that the mixture. It's just real.
Well, and it's not to say that I expect anyone to talk like me. It's just how I am. Like, if you don't want to cuss or you don't like cussing, don't cuss. It's like Michael Moore's thing when he says, if you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. It's like, just in the same way, like give me the space to use the language. I tend to not cuss at people or use ad hominem in my arguments, and but I do tend to use salty language. But you don't have to. Just and a lot of friends in my life don't do that.
No.
So just please don't look to me or the culture's the bar for what's right and wrong all the time.
Right, totally.
It's not. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Don't cuss if you don't want to cuss. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, my thing about it too is like specifically on this podcast. So, I mean, I'm not offended that Matt, that you use language like that, and I guess because I'm used to this, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like oh my gosh, my virgin ears can't handle these horrible things, and maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's because, I don't know, it just has never been something that offended me. My deal is like, I'll talk to anybody about anything, and especially though if we're having a conversation about something really important, and I think the things we've been talking about on these podcasts, they are important. These are conversations I really, really want to have, and I really want people to listen to. And so, I'm not going to say, well, I'm not going to have that conversation with you if you don't follow some kind of code of or ethics of certain kinds of language that makes me feel comfortable or whatever. Like, I'm not going to impose that on you or anybody, because I don't care about that. That's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is like these important issues and topics that we're trying to cover. But at the same time, I do understand, because some of the comments that we got on the Facebook group, and some people private messaged me, and some of them made these just comments on the Facebook group for Heretic Happy Hour. Like, hey, I usually listen to these podcasts with my family or with my daughter in the car, and I can't do that because it's explicit and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I get if that's really what you're trying to do. First of all, if you're a parent and you have the guts and the balls to play in the car a podcast with us talking about really faith-stretching things like what we're talking about on these podcasts, and you got the guts to talk to your kids about that stuff, man, God bless you. I think that's awesome. And so, yeah, I get it, I guess, if you don't want your kids to be exposed to bad language. So I can kind of see it on both sides. But I think sometimes the challenges, and we've talked about possibly doing censored versions of the previous podcast we've done, and then because there is some production involved with going back to those files, finding those, editing them out, re-uploading it to iTunes, et cetera, that we would charge like 99 cents for those. And that money would go into the swear jar, which I think is awesome. So anyway, I guess I can see both sides. I see that having freedom is great, and who cares about that? Like, that's not important. But at the same time, I get sometimes people being like, maybe the language is preventing me from sharing it with younger people or whatever. So I don't know. I guess I can kind of see it both ways.
Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I was just going to say I can see that too. And it's not that I wouldn't want people. I wouldn't want people to stop listening because of that, or to not be able to listen to it with your family. So I do see that side. There is a part of me that would probably say, like, if I was completely limited in my speech, I wouldn't be doing a podcast at all, just because it would be something I wouldn't be that interested in. I mean,
right. At
the end of the day, this is for me, it's content creation, it's art, and the minute that I don't get to create the art I want to, I'm just personally not that interested anymore. It doesn't mean I wouldn't go on to someone's podcast and not cuss. It doesn't mean I don't cuss when people ask me not to, but I probably wouldn't devote this much time to something and then have to be completely limited in. I mean, we could talk about all the topics in the world, but then just don't make sure you don't say shit, because then we're gonna. It would just be. It would just ruin my interest in something like that, I guess.
And that reminds me of a quote. I think is a quote by Tony Campolo, and I'll just read it. This is the quote by him. He says, "I have 3 things I'd like to say today. First, while you were sleeping last night, 30,000 kids died of starvation or diseases related to malnutrition. Second, most of you don't give a shit. What's worse is that you're more upset with the fact that I said shit than with the fact that 30,000 kids died last night." I think it's an interesting quote that I think it's relevant. And this brings up something that I've thought about in regards to this conversation and it goes back to this whole idea, because I've heard the pushback from people who are saying, "Hey man, is it, I listen with my kids. I don't know how profitable your language is. I don't think it's really advancing your agenda of what you want to talk about." And I would say this about the children thing. And I get it. I totally see your point of view. Like I can put myself in your shoes. I wouldn't want my small children to listen to that kind of language either. I'd get that. But that's just part of life. I mean, we deal with that on the radio. We deal with that on television shows. I mean, this is not like, people are going to create things that you necessarily wouldn't do. So if you like podcasts and you like listening to podcasts with your children, that's really cool. But this is probably not just me speaking for myself, I would say this is probably not a podcast that you're going to want to listen with your children, small children, because of the language. You just kind of have to, if you really want to listen to this podcast, you're going to have to adjust your schedule. It's just how it works. But the other thing I want to say about the language is it being profitable is I actually think cussing is profitable for what we're trying to do on this podcast. And here's why here's why I say that. Because when you're having conversations with religious folks, people who, and I'm including myself in this category, because I've come out of the evangelical background as far as my adult life goes. And I've been, was a pastor, went to Bible college, did the whole thing. It's so easy when you get into these conversations about deconstruction to miss the fact that you think you're like deconstructing, but there's so many things that there's a train of thoughts, like a cycle that goes on in our minds, and we hear things through a grid, and it really rarely gets challenged until somebody offends you or gets you out of the cycle. Cussing, and I personally get into personal coaching. I know some renowned personal coaches that they actually will use swear words in their presentation, and it really jolts people out because it breaks the cycle of religious thinking. So because literally dogmatism, legalism, all these things, these are ingrained in our thinking. And when you hear somebody drop the word fuck, and it's like, boom, it's a jolt. It jolts you out of this, and you go, wait a minute, what? And it kind of, and then the very thing that we're talking about, you're now having to experience and deal with. And so I actually think it's really good. We want to challenge people's religious mindsets and the fact that they're stuck in these repetitive cycles of religiosity. There's a greater way, in my opinion, to do it than to drop some swear words and to challenge, why does that offend you? Why does that disturb your peace? If your peace is disturbed by phonetic syllables that somebody else uses, that's something that you really need to examine. You don't have to use that language, but if it offends you, that's an issue in you.
Right, and I think going back to the the Campolo quote is that God, we seem so offended by the wrong things. I mean, we have you read the Old Testament? I mean, there's what we could consider offensive cussing language in that, or language about genocide, or language about sexual things that we probably shouldn't be reading with our kids, let's say. Or if we're going to be offended as adults, like why would we be offended about me using the F word, but we're not even going to bat an eye at some of the things that are even said in our Bible? I think it's just, or things that are not even that, things that are going on in the world, like Campolo quotes. Like, I mean, he's right. We talk about this quote because it's true. We don't give a shit when things happen across the world. We do care when it happens here. In the Vegas shooting, it was horrible, but when it happens, in places where people are brown, let's say, we don't give a shit. And it's sad, but true. We can bill all those to Tony.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, and that's a great point you made, Matt, about like reading the Bible. Because I have two boys, and when they're in college now, but when they were, like elementary school age, we had a routine at night where we would read. Especially when they were really little, we'd read little storybooks to them, and had this whole routine. It took us about an hour to get them to bed every night, but it was a really sweet thing. But when they got a little bit older and they could read for themselves, we were reading a little more advanced books. My wife and I were like, you know what? Why don't we just read the Bible to them? And so we literally we sat down. I remember the night we did this, and we opened up Genesis, right? Just not a children's Bible, because we'd done the little children's Bibles before that. So let's just read the real Bible. And I'm telling you, man, like you said, we figured out very quickly that the Bible, if you filmed it, like if you were to film the Bible as it is told, as the story is told, that would be an X-rated film. You would have not only full nudity, you would have incest.
Easy.
You have bloody, violent murders, like a brother killing a brother, on and on, like just horrible, awful stuff. Like, very quickly we were like, well, dude, forget this. We're going to go back to the children's version, because the actual Bible itself is a very adult book, And then back to Jamal and your comment as well. Like, I think it's possible that this podcast, as great as I think it is, I think it's awesome that we're discussing some really great stuff. But this might be a podcast that you can't share with your kids until they're a little bit older, right? Like, for example, again, with our kids, I love movies. I waited till my boys were, a little bit older before I showed them certain films that I love and I couldn't wait for them to watch, like Fight Club, for example. I'm not going to show my 8-year-old Fight Club, but when when they were 15, hey, let's watch Fight Club. So things like that, like it could be great and you can't wait to share it with your kids, but maybe this is one of those things that you need to just wait a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And Keith, can you imagine Fight Club like that was dumbed down to G-rated? Like it would lose its essence. You know what I mean? Like, what's the point of watching Fight Club? It's like,
it's like those VidAngel things, right? Where you filter out all the violence and all the swearing, and then if you watch like Pulp Fiction, the movie's like 10 minutes. So
yeah. Or the Passion of the Christ. If we take out all the violent scenes in the Passion of the Christ, you got no story.
Yeah, it's like, what happened?
Yeah.
Right. And I have to make the same decision with my daughter. I want to sit down and watch Lord of the Rings with her. It's epic. I mean, we read it, but we can watch Narnia together because it's lighter. It's not as dark. But it doesn't mean oh well. Peter Jackson and before him Tolkien should have really toned this down so I could watch it with my kid. I mean, that seems kind of, it would lose its essence. There'd be like a Shire scene, and then that's about it. Like they'd be in Rivendell next all of a sudden, and then the story would be over, and you'd be like, well, this is kind of a waste of time.
What was the hype about? I don't understand the hype. This thing was nothing.
Right. Yeah, they really edited it out. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I think one thing that is important and something that maybe we can address is that, and I know in the Facebook group it's been brought up, and I'm not sure if you got any personal messages about it, Keith, is this notion that the language is causing brothers and sisters in the faith to stumble. And I have my thoughts on it, but I would like to maybe see what you guys say about that, because I think it's important to address because it's actual concerns that people do have, and I'm probably, since I cuss the most, the one to blame for most of that, I guess.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I don't know, Keith, if you want to go. I do have a few thoughts about that particular argument.
I have just real quick. Mine'll be super quick. My thing about the causing people to stumble is the same comment we just made about the kids. Like, look, if you're an alcoholic and you struggle with alcohol, don't go to a bar. And so if you struggle with cursing yourself and you're trying yourself personally not to curse, and this podcast is causing you to stumble, or it's just offending you so badly, again, maybe this isn't the podcast for you, and we're sorry about that. But you know what I mean? Like, you have personal responsibility as well for yourself on your side of it, what you do or don't do, and you got to make those decisions for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point, Keith. And I want to say this about this whole thing about not causing your brother to stumble. Okay, I've heard this so much over the years, and people will take, obviously they're coming out of the book of Romans. It's Paul's instruction to the community there about the situation so there was an argument going on in the church community. They had a lot of those folks who had, come into a revelation of Christ and were living in this community were former folks that would, sacrifice meat to idols as part of the pagan religious practices of the day. And some folks who came out of that, they just felt like that was a trigger for them. It caused them to, caused them to really struggle, maybe even a temptation to kind of go back to those practices. So they had this rule. Some of those, believers had this rule that they can't eat meat sacrificed to idols. It was just wrong. And they literally invented this rule because it affected them, because they were affected by it, which is totally understandable. And there's nothing wrong that they were affected by that. The problem came in as they began to judge and try to put their convictions on everybody in the community. Now, there were other folks in the community that felt like, hey, this isn't even real. These gods you sacrificed this meat to, they're not actually really the real gods. This is folklore. It's just fairy tales. That's your issue. Like, it doesn't bother us. We're going to eat meat. Like, we're going to eat whatever we want to eat. And they would do it in such a way, and then they would pass judgment on some of the folks. They call them the weaker brothers and sisters that felt like they didn't have freedom. They were passing judgment on them for not being able to eat this meat without being triggered and that kind of thing. So, and then they would flaunt it almost in front of these other people that felt like they didn't have freedom to eat meat. They would flaunt it in front of them, and it would cause them to stumble. And so Paul was interjecting and saying, "Hey, listen, guys, look, if you feel like you can't eat meat, then don't. And if you feel, but don't judge your brothers and sisters that feel like they do have freedom to eat meat sacrificed. Don't judge them. Look, you're going to stand before God and give an account, and they are too. And don't worry about that." And the same thing, he spoke to the older brothers and sisters and was like, "Look, if you have freedom in this area, just be sensitive to the ones that don't, and don't flaunt it in front of them. You eat meat in your own homes. Like, guys, you don't have to flaunt this stuff. Just be sensitive." And I get that. Here's the thing. All right. Here's the thing. This is a very different topic when it comes to cussing. That same scripture and that same story, it was used, to say, hey, you guys shouldn't be cussing, and this is the reason why, and they brought up that scripture. This is used so often. It's like a broken record. It's absolutely part of it's the point I want to make with this is they don't understand when you use scripture to manipulate people, and I feel like it's manipulation. You're really trying to control when you use the weaker brother argument, and you're speaking for the weaker brother as if you're the weaker brother, which, by the way, if you're a weaker person in this, you're not going to be using this argument. All right. But they're using it as hey, I'm the weaker brother and you shouldn't be doing this because you're causing me to stumble. Using that argument is be the same. Again, I know I don't want to beat this too much, but imagine if you grew up in a house, all right, and you grew up in a house and you have a bunch of kids, and you guys are sitting around the table. One of the kids is overweight and has an ice cream addiction, let's just say, and one of the other older siblings is that's not their issue, and they're like, man, I'm gonna. I don't have that same problem. I'm going to eat ice cream anytime I want. And so every time this older sibling gets out ice cream, the younger sibling is really tempted and starts to pig out in the ice cream. And then, they're a mess. And they're so mom and dad are going out of town for the weekend. And, the younger sibling is really concerned, man, if you guys aren't here, I know they're going to have parties, ice cream parties, and I'm just going to get sucked into this ice cream party. I'm going to eat ice cream until I vomit. And I'm worried about that. So mom and dad leave a note and say, okay, kids, have a good time. But here's the thing. Don't, older Johnny, your younger brother, really struggles with ice cream. Please don't flaunt it in front of him. take it to your room, if you're going to eat ice cream, because you know how they struggle. All right. And then imagine this younger sibling takes that note and goes to all the grocery stores in town and going, hey, my dad, he's like a celebrity in the town. By the way, he wrote a note saying, I could really struggle if people eat ice cream around me. So, hey, I want you to stop selling ice cream. Hey, I want you to stop. That's ridiculous. But that's what people do with Paul's letter. They try to apply this to everything and completely not the context. Like, people don't have to listen to this podcast. They really don't. So nothing's being flaunted in front of somebody to cause another person to stumble. Actually, the reason that you feel sensitive about this is the very thing that you need to address in yourself. That's all I want to say about that topic.
Well, and what I want to emphasize is I do not go around on the streets just fuck, bitch, shit. And if someone, so for instance, I'm also, I'm helping this lady deconstruct things and work through some theologies. And at times I jump on a 3-way call with someone she knows, maybe a cousin or something, and she says, "Hey Matt, just try not to cuss." And I don't cuss, So I'm not just blurting it out, but listen, we're advertising that there's explicit content, and we're telling people this is what this is. We're going to be forthright with it. And we want you to come. Of course, we want you to be a part of it because the topics are what's important, and we need to have this conversation. But if you can't get past that, please know that this is what we're doing. Let me give you an analogy. If I advertise, I make a flyer, I advertise to my friends and family that on the 24th we're going to have this cookout or a barbecue, and we're going to have hot dogs, we're going to have hamburgers, and we're going to have all this, and you see it, and you go, okay, I'm going to come to this.
I'll be there.
But I'm a vegetarian, so I'm going to, maybe there's vegetarian options, or maybe you bring your own veggie burger or something. Like, you can't then go to the barbecue and say, well, you need to not serve meat at this barbecue because I'm a vegan and I don't like that fact that there's meat here. I'm against that. So please, I want my veggie burger, but please do not eat meat. Like, turn the grill off and take the meat off, and then we can all have veggie burgers or something. Yeah. Like, it just, to me, that doesn't work, and that seems to be an apt analogy here because we're advertising what this is, and we're saying, I'm not saying, Keith, you have to cuss like me, or Jamal, you have to cuss like me, or the listeners, when you leave a voicemail, you have to cuss. Just allow me to, and I'm not going to flaunt it or judge you for not doing it, but that's just what it is in this piece of, I guess if you want to call it art, this content that we're creating, that this is a part of it. But we're being forthright about it.
Yeah.
Can I tell a joke?
Please.
Oh, we always love those.
Okay, there's a CrossFitter, a vegan, and an atheist, and they walk into a bar. And the only reason we know is because they told everyone in the first 5 minutes.
That reminds me of a Joe Rogan bit where he tells the same basically joke, like, how can you recognize vegan? They'll let you know the first 5 seconds. To offend our vegan listeners. Jokes, they're just jokes, people.
Yeah, they're just jokes, yeah.
So, sometimes we can't take ourselves so seriously.
Well, and guys, right? and we've said this several times, so here's the thing too, like, there's probably, and I'm approximating, but there's probably like over 700 Christian podcasts on iTunes, and we're one of the only ones, if not the only one. There's probably a couple more that are Christian podcasts that are explicit, and so and again, I feel weird because I feel like what we're saying is don't listen to this podcast, because we're not saying that. Of course, we do want you to listen to this podcast, but we are saying that if you just can't get over it. Or if the only way you can listen to this podcast is with your kids, you can't listen in your car when you're driving to work, you can't listen when they go to sleep at night, there's no other way or option for you except with your family or with your kids. I mean, if that's you, then I guess you've got to make your own decision about that. But what we're saying is, and if you haven't gotten the message yet, let's just say it, we're not changing anything about this podcast. We're not changing anything at all about the way we are going to communicate going forward. So we have a lot of great episodes coming up. We have a lot of exciting topics we're going to be covering, and it's going to be explicit. And there's going to be times we're just going to talk the way we would normally talk. We're going to have freedom to communicate and to say whatever we feel like we need to say. And if that's not something you can hang with, we're sorry that you can't hang with us. But we need to do what we're doing, right? This is what we have put together. This is what we've thought about and planned out, and we're just going to have to be who we are.
Yeah, and it's really, I'm really actually pleasantly surprised and pleased also about the fact that we had to introduce this topic because of the backlash about the language, because that is actually the very thing that we're trying to draw attention to is, guys, like seriously, instead of focusing so much of your attention on trying to control the actions of other people, which is manipulation, by the way, which is religion, which is the very religion we've all been really like affected by in a negative way. Take that same focus and energy and ask yourself, why does it bother me that other people do things that I personally may not do? And really examine that. And this topic gives us the ability to do that. And I think cussing has actually created this episode, which I think is really important. So I'm actually excited that people are upset with all the stuff going on in the world and even the abuses that are committed by Christianity on a regular basis against people, that this is the topic that has drawn the most offense so far, which is really interesting.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? Yes. Well, we've done 3 episodes, which I thought we touched some pretty hot button topics here, and we know there's more coming up. But like the one that got the most volume of comments, like come on, we had to stop our normal flow and do a timeout, and let's do a special episode just to address the language. Like, why is that, out of everything we're talking about, that's what you guys are upset about? That's the nerve we've touched? Like, I don't even get that. That's weird.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Matt's been naughty again.
Matt,
yeah.
You're just...
It kind of almost, we haven't talked about starvation in the world, but it almost kind of proves Campolo's point. That it's weird what we do get offended by, and it's not to say I don't think many were that upset by it, and those who asked questions weren't necessarily all that upset. Maybe some were just asking questions, but it is interesting that we were, you're right, we went out there on some of these issues. I think Jamal said some things where even, I don't remember what he said, but where I was like, ooh, like even I twisted my face up. And
Harris.
But then we're talking, but yeah, I know, right? And then we're talking about, just phonetic sounds that have a certain cultural context, and as if because I'm offended that everyone should be offended and that everyone's I don't even hear cuss words anymore. I'm almost the opposite. Like, I love stand-up, but Jim Gaffigan, and they're funny, and even Jerry Seinfeld, they're funny, but they're not as funny as Bill Burr or Louis C.K. to me, or Dave Chappelle. And it's like it's like different,
or Bernie Mac, different
strokes for different folks. Like, some people love Jim Gaffigan. He's clean. I've never heard him cuss once, and that's fine. Yeah. Watch him. But and then don't watch Bill Burr if you're offended by Bill Burr.
Can I say I listen to both. I love Chris Rock. I love Jim Gaffigan. I love George Carlin, right. And I love Jerry Seinfeld. Like, I listen to all of them. I'm not like I can only listen to clean ones, and I can't listen to those that drop F-bombs. Like, no, if it's funny. Look, all I care about is it funny. If it's funny, I'll listen to it. Why is it like, oh no, I can't? I've got to draw some line. And look, don't you guys think it goes back? I mean, this whole thing about being offended, you're a Christian and you get offended, you get the heebie-jeebies when someone drops an F-bomb and like, you know what I mean? It's like, we haven't touched on this yet. I know we're almost out of time here, but I mean, doesn't it really go back to like, it's wrong because your mom told you it was wrong, or it's wrong because your pastor said you're going to go to hell if you talk that way, or like, I mean, isn't it
right.
This bigger issue that I think there are Christians who are still operating under this Sunday school kind of mentality that if you use bad language, you're a sinner and you're going to hell, and you're a bad boy and you got to wash your mouth with soap or whatever. It's like, it's just kind of a silly. And I'm sorry, now I feel like I'm belittling people that are offended, but to me, it comes across like that. Like, it's weird to me, I guess, the lines that some people draw. And they're not always consistent. Let me just say this. Here's an example. This is not really cussing, but this is what I'm talking about, the kind of like the inconsistency, right? So I have a friend. Sorry, he knows who he is if he's listening. So I have a friend, and he's like, he only listens to Christian music. He will not listen to secular music, even if it's like U2, right? Because they're like, they have Christian lyrics, but they're on like a secular label. No, they're on a secular label. They're not Christians. I can't listen to them. I only listen to Christian music. Okay, well, whatever. If that's your conviction, good for you. You're shutting yourself off from all this great music, but that's fine. That's your conviction. But the same guy will go and watch an R-rated film 50 times in the theater because it's so flippin' awesome and he loves it. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I don't get this. So why is it that secular music is off limits? Even if they're not cussing in the song, it's just not quote unquote Christian lyrics. That's off base for you. But if you go and watch the new James Bond movie and he's like having sex with 3 women, in the space of a day, and he's murdering people left and right and smiling and cracking jokes about it, that's okay. Like, what the heck? Like, why have you... So, I mean, that kind of stuff drives me crazy. And I feel like Christians especially draw these arbitrary lines all over the place. Like, this is bad, this is unacceptable, but this thing over here, I'll give myself a pass. Like, I just don't get it.
I think I have a suggestion that I think could help the listeners. And I don't mean this in a condescending way at all, because this really helps me sometimes. Like, I literally try to take a day, like put it on your calendar, like look at like Monday through Sunday, pick one day that you're going to focus all your attention. All right. Like one day of the week. To say, for example, next week, say on Wednesday next week, I am going to make a conscious effort to judge nothing as right or wrong. Because we as Christians, we talk about the dangers of living from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's not a good thing. We're not supposed to live by this tree. This is something that really affects us. It brings death to us. So take a day and say, okay, I'm going to take an entire day and I'm going to go through life and I'm not going to actually make any, I'm just going to operate from the place of, I'm going to look for love. I'm going to operate from love. And that's it. I'm going to look for life. I'm going to operate from life. And then that's it. I'm not going to judge something as good or evil. Just try it and see how much energy you have at the end of the day. See how it makes you feel. Like actually it brings joy to your heart to not be so beat down, because when you judge things as good or evil, it takes a toll on you, literally. And this is the thing that we're trying to I personally am trying to really, because I think it's the root of religion that we're really trying to shake loose in people. And this topic really gives us an ability to address that.
Right. And yeah, it's this whole mentality that, you're right, Jamal, we got to get out of that zeros and ones thinking, that, binary thinking. It's, we got to invent our quantum computers. We can't just be thinking in this antiquated, religious dualistic way. And dualism's fine if I want to get to where I'm going, if I want to make a left instead of a right. But labeling all these things up and down, left and right, good and bad, evil, that is the problem. And it's God, I got too many fucking things to worry about in my own life to be worried about what the language of others is. Are we? I don't want to sound angry, but are we really that put together where we have to then point and say, no one's being coercive. There's nothing interrelationally that is a problem with words in and of themselves. Have we got our shit together so much that we have to be so concerned about what words other people use?
Yeah.
So that's just we need to shed that binary only way of thinking. Don't judge those things. Don't label those things for a while. Like Jamal said, try that out. See how you start to actually live in this presence, this what Richard Rohr would call the naked now. Yeah. We start to start observing things, and we're not judging things any longer. And we're just actually living in the here and now, in the present moment.
Yeah.
I like the naked now. I like that term.
I like the word naked.
Yeah, I do too.
I wanted to say.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to say. And totally in the spirit of that, guys. I would say to people listening, if you, let's be honest. If you're offended by cuss words, you've already checked out by now. You're not listening to me. But by some miracle, if you are, I would say to just refuse to be offended. I love Jamal. I love your thing about take a day and don't judge things. I would say take a day and just refuse to be offended. Just say, I'm not going to be offended. I don't care what people say to me or just in their own world. I just refuse to be offended. I'm just going to set myself free from the burden of being offended by anything. I'm not going to be offended. And I think it's a decision. I think you can choose just to say, I'm not going to be offended by anything. And instead, like, what does that free you up to do? Well, it frees you up to listen. It frees you up to consider the other person. It frees you up to even just be aware of what God might be doing in that moment. That you might have missed if you got so offended and huffed off, and shut yourself off. So, and by the way, there's some great books. I think Brant Hansen has a book called Unoffended or Unoffendable or something. And another guy named Steve Gregg who, he has a really good series on refusing to be offended as well, which I think that's good advice. And I encourage you to please just try it. You know what I mean? Just try to let go of offense and to really accept people for who they are and where they're at. And you know what? If you do that, guess what? They might do that for you too. That'd be a really cool thing.
Yeah. Can I plug a book also as well? There's a book I recently read, and I apologize because the names of the authors are slipping in my mind right now, but the title of the book is The 5 Agreements, and it's basically an updated version from the 4 Agreements. It's a very popular book. It is a game changer. I promise you, if you read this book, it'll change your life. One of the agreements in that book is called take nothing personal. And it literally, like, if you make a decision, a choice to take nothing personal in life, like, everybody is operating from their own context, their own stories, and it's not about you. So don't take it personal. You can disagree with something or what somebody may do, but you don't have to take it personal, because so much of our conflicts that happen not only in our interpersonal relationships, but also even in the world, and especially when we're discussing ideas of like religious deconstruction, so much of the things that get in the way of that conversation is personal offense. So if we just agree not to take anything personally, then we'll be able to have these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. I like that. I think I read that book at one point.
Did you?
Yeah, a couple years ago. Yeah, I loved it. It was great. It's short, right? Like less than 100 pages, right?
Yeah, short, but
yeah.
just power packed.
I think I'm going to write a book called The 7 Agreements. I'm working on that right now.
Yeah, update that shit.
I'm going to just, yeah.
I thought I got one in. Dang it.
Well, guys, I think
it was delayed.
I think this has been awesome, by the way. I think there's been some really great stuff here, but I think we need to wrap it up. We're coming up near the end of the show here. Oh my gosh, there's the song.
Oh, that's the playoff music.
Yep.
There we go.
So, hey, this has been a special edition of Heretic Happy Hour. We are going to return. Our next episode, we'll jump back into our regular topic.
Yeah, discovering Christ in non-Christian things.
Did we mention the hotline? Did we mention the hotline? Call the hotline, guys. I don't know if we talked about that, but in case we didn't, look like
240.
We'll try to figure that out.
240-343-7379.
Call it today.
Call now.
Stand by.